Thank you very much, Roland. Let's take a step back and take Mr. Schirmer's shoes. We still have a security gap in our controller that was detected by threat modeling, and you, as a device manufacturer, builder, or operator, have to react and report this security gap. And of course, you want to know when you can reckon on a workaround, because upon commissioning, your plant is not to show any exploitable bug. Now, how does that work? We at 3S have invested a lot of energy in recent years into definition of an elaborate security process in order to professionally react to safety gaps. Mr. Schirmer would like to report this security gap, and there are 4 ways. An external report, which is the case here, the report by a device manufacturer, the report by a third-party software like OpenSSL and SVN, or an internal report from a 3S employee from the CODESYS security team. Mr. Schirmer would now write a mail to security@codesys.com or use the online form on codesys.com/security in order to report that gap. The online form is interesting if the report is submitted anonymously because a part of the product name, the version, and as much information as to reproducibility, Wireshark or code traces don't have to be indicated. Should you contact us by mail, we will contact you as soon as possible, and that is the point in time when a security issue is raised, and then the competent expert tries or starts examining that gap without bureaucratic hurdles, and the data thus evaluated, a CVSS score is calculated that decides about priority of the security issue. After that examination, there will be a security body meeting without bureaucratic hurdles and very fast, and there are 2 decisions made. In what version and when is the problem being addressed, and how do we deal with it with regard to the public? When and to what circle of interested parties do we publish advisories? Planning of a version is dealt with as is done with every bug, depending on priority. The prioritization takes place, and the security gap is always a critical bug. Depending on the type of weakness, the security board or body decides about publication and publication time of advisories. So we will inform the device manufacturers in good time so that they can react, and of course we issue updates for advisories if we find workarounds, and the release of the advisories is done when the security patch is released. This is our in-house security process. And now let me ask you, the audience, who has already updated a released system with a security patch published by us, or who has at least heard about such updates? Well, I need to document that, excuse me. You do that with a selfie. In my notes, it says expected feedback, 0. So, we have noticed that it is not too easy to update the system with a security patch, and there are many problems for that. First of all, too much time passes between the release and the firmware updates in the machine. That is measurable in support because we help mechanical engineers that have to work with older versions of CODESYS. In addition, there are no pure security patches. So maybe you require a service pack update to remedy a weak spot. And then there is the operation windows. The maintenance windows of running systems are too short. Systems cannot be shut down at all or stopped at all, and all these common known factors. There are many causes for that, but three causes are decisive here. First of all, we have a very long process chain for the firmware to leave QS and end up with the operator. And in this chain, very deep and deep-rooted tests, some of them redundant, are done. We have a very long process chain. Well, as I said, we do not offer dedicated security patches. So repair in a patch goes hand in hand with other repairs, cannot be extracted. And if we only close that security gap or hole, we would have much less to do in our value chain and could respond much swifter. And as to operation, the runtime system does not allow for the exchange of individual components on the fly or whilst the machine or system is running. Well, what have we thought up? What have we come up with? Well, on the one hand, we could offer firmware ourselves. We partly do that with the SM runware. We could define dedicated security patches which would make matters much more transparent. You would see everything at a glance in the value chain and we could be swifter. Or we look at what is technically feasible in order to assist you. If we go back to our control and the safety gap, the effect is the web server in there, or integrated here, has a security gap. So after one client request, there are no other client requests authorized. A clear denial of service, like with that Chrome browser. So if I open a second browser, a second client, so if we look at these two browser instances, then we see that one thing is up and running on one side, but on the other side I have a problem. The web server does not allow any further connection. So what have we come up with? I go to CODESYS, link with control, and with backup and restore, there is a new button called update. Let me minimize that. Now I select the component I want to update and then state what implementation I want to load. Okay. And what happens now is along the lines of a tiny click for me, but a giant click for mankind, because now there is a jitter-free exchange of web server. All components that use the web server will not notice anything about it. And in Firefox, the connection should be opened.
Ja, super.
Great, thank you very much for this warm applause. This is due to the designers and developers on 3S that bent over backwards to be able to present this technology to you. And we call that hot swap. Now, if we go back to control and look at the current state of security, then you see that this controller now is also safe because it has been updated. Okay, now what is behind hot swap technology? For presentation purposes, it wasn't too spectacular because you don't see anything, but if I explain the technical background, a lot will become clear. First of all, you have to look at the status quo, so we might have a CMP-v1 with various functions. This can be directly queried by other components. We have a runtime component manager that starts and properly initializes the components. If you want to swap a component, you have to create an indirection that separates interface and implementation. We will do that with a wrapper that is a component itself and passes on to the right implementation when function is called. Moreover, we need data availability. So the new implementation must be in a position to take over old implementation data. In this case, it was the Chrome connection that was not interrupted, but it was rather passed on from one implementation to the other without breaking off. Now, if you want to update this component, you first of all dynamically load the new implementation. It's registered at the wrapper, is gained access to the intra-component range of memory and can expand that depending on what happened during implementation, and then it is initialized and started. And during that phase, component queries are done via CMP to CMP-v1. Only after implementation of CMP-v2 has been done, there is a atomar switch, and all the queries from components are then directed to CMP-v2. So we have successfully implemented and updated the component and can withdraw CMP-v1. Well, this describes the high-end version of our future update strategy. Overall, we will have 3 steps. First of all, we are going to offer the update via a bootloader, so the complete firmware can be updated, middleware can be loaded or updated, and it will be possible to update the operating system. The second stage is exchange of individual components, or update of individual components by stopping, exchanging, and starting. That can be above all interesting if new features or components are to be added during development, because it's very easy a way to increase the runtime functionality. And the third version is the one that I've just shown you, hot swapping individual components during operation. The technical requirements for hot swap are pretty easy. All you need is a dynamically linked component. We don't have too many requirements, dynamically linked component, and it works with that. Yeah, well, in general, the challenge when developing IoT or IIoT devices is managing to provide a good mechanism to provide firmware updates. So we can think up a lot of strategies, but we need good ways to roll these out. Because once the device is installed, firmware updates are of pivotal importance. If you want your device to have a long lifetime, if you have devices that are installed far away or in hard to access places, or if manual interference is difficult or costly. So the firmware update process has to guarantee that the firmware is authenticated, so that there are no evil firmware flash attempts, and the firmware needs to be dealt with confidentially. So restoration of clear text binaries must be prevented. Of course, this results in various requirements we have to bear in mind, and we want to realize and implement ourselves in future. For example, the bootloader has to be as minimalistic as possible. We only want it to have flash and crypto functionalities that are important to read, validate, and write the firmware. It must be able to work without updates, and additional functionality is to be retrofitted via a two-step bootloader. I have just demonstrated this point high availability to you. You can have a hot swap update of components. This will not work for everyone, but for security updates, it's easily conceivable. Then, of course, it is of essential importance that a mistake during update does not cause machine time loss. Here, you need to react properly, and if push comes to shove, the old software is to be reinstalled. We need a minimal effect on existing firmware formats. Now, what does that mean? A firmware update must not require changes in existing firmware formats, because there would be a hard version break. We at 3S want to continue living the spirit of product evolution that is also gaining ground with the big players like Apple and Windows or Microsoft, and we don't want to go for hard version breaks. Of course, you were shocked before. We need to implement and use state-of-the-art security mechanisms. So at our time of age, we assume that there must be a minimum security that is end-to-end between author and SPS. The rollback attacks need to be prevented, and parser functionalities need to be reduced to a minimum. Along with that, you need reliable authorization structures. It could be that the firmware author is not authorized to update the planned control because it is in a critical infrastructure environment and can only be updated if both the firmware author and the operator have signed the firmware, signaling the controller that it is okay to accept that firmware update in question. In addition, the firmware update must be completely independent of the transmission path. Today, we offer various communication means. We want to use them and not restrict them by firmware updates. So TCP/IP, UDP/IP, CAN, serial, all these paths of communications are to be and will be available for firmware updates. In addition, We require suitable broadcast mechanisms for distribution. We sell more than 1 million device licenses per year, and therefore we need good mechanisms with which to roll out the updates. It is just not conceivable that someone manually updates 1 million controls. Which brings me to our vision. It is our vision to make update strategies and mechanisms as well as the required infrastructure available to you. In a nutshell, if an SPS update is as easy as the one of your oven, your toothbrush, or your lawnmower, we have hit bullseye. And only then will we be able to offer and sell future-oriented and future-capable controls. You've seen that we fed in the update via CODESYS. Now we have made an initial step with hot swap, but working via CODESYS looks like updating Word via Visual Studio. I had no authorizations or anything. But Mr. Kettele will now tell you how to put these requirements into practice. Thanks ever so much.